Audio Jungle.
Big announcement on Wednesday having to do with tax reform. The process has begun long ago, but it really formally begins on Wednesday. So go do it. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, I think that's called let's get bigly with it, because when the president indicated that it was coming and that it wouldn't be delayed, at least his part, a plan out of the White House, the markets like that. The markets, of course, have been waiting for this for some time. Down today, up on the week, and if our Charlie Gasparino is right, looking for something more than just marginal. What are you hearing, Charlie?
Here's what we're hearing simply is that next week they're going to have some, or at least the president suggests they're going to have some tax cut proposal that's going to be unveiled. Now, we should point out, Neil, this comes after 2 weeks of incredible pressure by conservative pundits, by Phil Gramm, the former senator, supply-sider, tax cutter from Texas,
right,
on the need now to cut marginal tax rates on individuals and get a decent corporate tax rate cut, and that a criticism of the Trump administration on delaying that. Now, on top of their criticisms, as you know, markets have been up nice since President Trump was elected. But if you look at the markets since March 1, around the time when you interviewed Steve Mnuchin, and he set an August deadline for a pretty comprehensive tax cut plan, markets have been down since then. And the reason why, quite simply, is an indecision on the part of the Trump administration as to the size, scope, and the timing of the tax cut. Now, what was fascinating about today is we have the president coming out saying, citing a Wednesday deadline to come up with some sort of plan or proposal. Then the White House, right after that, came out and said, nah, maybe not Wednesday. He's just, we don't know exactly what he means by that.
Right.
And then the president coming out again saying, yeah, it's probably Wednesday. So I will tell you, if you look at the markets on those statements, the market's been whipsawing on that. The uncertainty, I will tell you, about this thing is not being treated very favorably by sophisticated investors. And I guess they would like the White House to speak with one voice on this, and kind of a coherent voice at that.
And one of the things, too, is, and this was rather telling, when the president was saying, look, I know there's this other stuff out there, and everyone's kind of fixated on what we do in 100 days. That magic moment comes next weekend. But that he was saying, look, we're going to do this, and don't get bogged down in the health care thing. I want you to react to this.
You're going to do health care and tax reform?
It'll happen. We'll see what happens. No particular rush, but we'll see what happens. But healthcare is coming along well. Government is coming along really well. A lot of good things are happening. Thank you, folks.
You're going to get a healthcare vote next week? 100 days?
No, doesn't matter if it's next week. Next week doesn't matter.
Next week doesn't matter. Now, he was walking with Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. Those two buildings, the White House and the Treasury, are next door to each other, so that's why it's a relatively easy thing to do.
Right.
But what did you make of that? That he seems to be saying, yeah, I'm still going full steam ahead on a revamp of health care. Right. I think I'm getting more support than I used to get. I'm paraphrasing this sentiment that's building in the White House, that they've got maybe more votes than they had last time for a rework. But again, they could be losing moderates. We don't know, so why jump and make those guesses? But on the health care thing versus the tax thing, he seems to be telegraphing, I'm going to do this dual track approach here. What do you make of that?
Well, remember, they've been saying forever that, or since this whole process began, that they needed to do health care first before they do tax cuts, because there was some implied savings in the health care. The CBO would see the savings in the health care reform, and thus they'd be able to plow that into the tax cuts. You and I have been talking, listen, just do the tax cuts. The economy's calling for it. Stop being such a green eye shade. And it looks like the president is now saying that they're going to do the tax cuts first, and that health care, if it comes along, it comes along. If it doesn't, we're not going to push the timing, that we're going full speed on tax cuts. So, listen,
that's unusual in of itself, and I'll get into this with a key member of the House Ways and Means Committee. But this notion that you needed whatever the revenue base from a healthcare overhaul to proceed with that, he seems to be intimating maybe not.
He's backing off that. Now, it's interesting what came before him backing off that, and it was two columns. One in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, and one in the New York Times. The New York Times, I believe, was written by Steve Moore and Arthur Laffer and Larry Kudlow, all supply-side economists. The Wall Street Journal was written by Phil Gramm, the former supply-side senator from Texas, and they both came out and said, listen, you are blowing an historic opportunity to cut taxes and to return money back to the American people and to get this economy, which has grown at less than 2% under the Obama years, to get it growing like it should grow so wages go up. And I think that may have hit home with Donald Trump.
All right, my friend, thank you very much. Great reporting, as always. Charlie Gasparino. All right, so the news here, folks, is that the president is going to go full steam ahead next Wednesday, where they'll outline their plan, that is the White House blueprint, for a big old tax cut. He says bigger than anything we have seen. That would mean bigger than anything we've gotten in the past, the last go-around with, of course, the Ronald Reagan tax cuts a generation ago. Illinois Republican Congressman Peter Roskam joining us. He is a crucial member of that very crucial committee, House Ways and Means, where they've been working on this for some time now anyway. Very good to have you, Congressman. It sounds that the president wants to go through with an offer plan of his own next Wednesday. Is that being coordinated with you guys?
Well, this is welcome news. We've been waiting for a long time for the White House, Neil. As you know, the House has a blueprint. It's a plan that we embrace and we enjoy and we think is a good proposal.
Is it your plan? Is it roughly the same, 7 rates to 3, a cut in the corporate tax, et cetera?
I think there's going to be elements of this. But look, your guess is as good as mine, which is why this is news. When the president's coming out now and saying that they're going to have a dramatic tax cut, I think that's music to people's ears. So here's what we've got to sort out. Will it be as dramatic
as yours? Do you want it to be as dramatic as yours? You're going to cut all the rates, bring it down to 3. You're going to take the top rate, bring it down to 33%, the corporate rate presumably down to 20%, maybe lower. Are you all roughly in agreement on those broad parameters that you know?
I haven't seen the president's plan, so I can't speak to that directly. We also want to get small business, that is pass-throughs, their business income down to 25%. But look, I think that in the great scheme of things, this is a good move forward. We've now got the White House that's taking the initiative, communicating in some ways a date certain here, and now we can get about this great debate. We know what we think, or we've got a plan in the House. We need to hear from the White House. Senate's got to engage at some point on this, but here's what we know. We can't stay here. And the notion of taking advantage of what is really a national inflection point on taxes, I think it's where the action is. So let's move. Let's start.
All right, but are you supportive of moving, even if you don't get a health care rework done?
Look, I would divorce the two, and I wouldn't let healthcare hold up the progress on tax reform. My preference is drop the current healthcare bill, take a running start at it, and say we're not gonna be limited to an arbitrary deadline. An arbitrary deadline does what for you? It does nothing.
Do you know if your chairman Kevin Brady feels the same way, Congressman? That look, if you're going nowhere on the healthcare front, even though it's looking a little more promising last go around, go full steam ahead on this.
Oh, I don't want to speak for the chairman because I haven't spoken to him directly about the timing. But I do know this. He's interested in moving forward on tax reform, and I think an overwhelming majority of folks are. I mean, look, this is where there is a national consensus in this sense. Nobody is defending the status quo of the tax code. Nobody likes it. So since that is true, let's take advantage of that and let's drive a growth agenda. And so I think it's good news that the White House is coming out and saying we've looked at all these things and we're going to be articulating our plan. Great.
Next Wednesday. So let me ask you this then, Congressman, is with these supply-siders, the Art Laffers and the others, very big proponents of big tax cuts because they say that is the only kind of stimulus game in town. They've also said don't get so worked up about whether they're revenue neutral in the beginning. In other words, that they're paid for in the beginning because they'll pay for themselves later on. Do you subscribe to that view yourself? Do you believe that?
Well, here's part of it. So here's part of the thing that we've got to think through. Number one, do they pay for themselves in the long run? And I'm talking to you from the state of Illinois, which is no stranger to you in terms of fiscal disaster and avoidance behavior as it relates to debt. So set that question aside for a second. The other question is, do we want permanent tax policy, or do we just want a tax policy that's going to expire in 10 years? And if we're trying to influence business behavior, which we are, if we want to have a manufacturing renaissance, which we do, if we want people to reshore their corporate interests here in the United States, do we really think they're going to do that on a tax code that expires in 10 years? So I'd say let's not start out out at the notion of throwing the towel in on revenue neutrality or having this pay for itself. We can have this pay for itself. We can have growth. We can deal with the tax base, the erosion of the tax base, and we can have a permanent tax code. So
but you'd have to give on something, right? You'd have to do something, either scale back some tax breaks that are popular today, like for state local taxes. Would you be open to that?
Look, so the blueprint puts the House blueprint puts a lot of those sacred cows on the table, and final decisions, such as state and local, for example,
such as charitable deductions.
No, not charitable. That's too.
What
sacred.
About mortgage interest? Mortgage interest
too
taxes.
Sacred. Right. So there's some, but not others. And I take your point. You've got to dial these things up or dial them back. But here's what I think we should be doing as a threshold issue, Neil. We ought not be walking away from pushing for a permanent tax code. We've got American fiscal and tax policy is inverted right now. We have temporary tax policy and we have permanent spending policy.
So just so I want to be clear, sir, I mean, the president sounds like he wants to do this rate thing next week. Sounds like he's still keen on reducing corporate taxes, overhauling that. Sounds like that would be concurrent. In other words, done at the same time. Are you of that opinion as well, that they should be done at the same time? You shouldn't do the corporate thing first and then address the individual rate stuff, or what?
I think you've got to do it all at the same time, and here's why. The vast majority of my constituency, it's a pass-through constituency. I've got a lot of LLCs and a lot of S-corps, and the notion of me going back to that constituency and say, hey, listen, we took care of the corporate guys, and we're going to get you on the next helicopter out of here, it's completely unacceptable. We got to do it all at once and take care of it all at once.
We should explain that a lot of those individuals of whom you're speaking pay at the individual rate, and so if they're rated, if corporate rates are cut, that had nothing to do for them. Congressman, thank you very much. Hope you have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Neil.
All right. Well, the defense secretary, James Mattis, in Israel with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and they're both talking about the same thing, Iran, that deal, reviewing it, and maybe just shredding it. This week in Iran, in which they're flouting missiles, talking about death to Israel, destroy Israel, that a lot of the goodwill supposedly generated from that nuclear agreement is yet to be realized. And now you have the defense secretary in Israel meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying maybe the time is now to revisit all of this. From a legal perspective on this, I want to go to Professor Emeritus, multiple best-selling author and Harvard Law School genius, Alan Dershowitz. Alan joins us via Skype. Alan, very good to have you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't even know if this agreement was ever signed by the Iranians, but in the event that it was not, is there an agreement there at all?
Well, there is an agreement. We've already given them multiple $1 billion back, and they have actually stopped developing their nuclear arms program. But this agreement is no better than the agreement that the Clinton administration made with North Korea. And look what happened with North Korea. We made an agreement, they broke it. They now have a nuclear arsenal which limits the options that we have to prevent them from developing a missile system capable of hitting the west coast of the United States with nuclear weapons. And we have to learn from the terrible North Korean mistake not to allow it to be repeated with Iran. Now, I think this is a terrible deal with Iran, but I don't think it should be torn up because we've already given them so much under the deal, and they have slowed down their process. What we have to do
have they honored it, though, Alan? Have they honored it? And that would be the impetus for ripping it up, I guess.
I think they've honored it because they know that under this deal, they're entitled to develop a nuclear arsenal in about 8 or 9 years. We have to enforce the first part of the deal that says, quote, Iran reaffirms that it will never under any circumstances seek to acquire or develop nuclear weapons. We need Congress to enact the law now, saying that's part of the foreign policy of the United States. And if Iran ever seeks to develop nuclear weapons, we authorize the president to take whatever military action is necessary to stop that. Tom Friedman proposed that. He's very liberal and supportive of the Obama administration.
Would the Iranians have to write off on that, Alan? Would the Iranians have to, if you add a paragraph or a line like that, and the Iranians refuse to sign it because they say you're altering the deal to which we agreed, and this other stuff that the Secretary of State mentioned earlier in the week about provocative actions Iran has taken around the globe, they are got nothing to do with this deal. Then what?
Now, first of all, let's divide it into two. They have already said in the deal itself, we reaffirm we will never under any circumstances. All we're doing is holding them to their words. All we're doing is saying we accept that part of the deal as binding as every other part of the deal. The other material about rockets, we made a mistake. We didn't put it in the deal. I think we're stuck with that. But I think Congress ought to now enact a statute saying the part of the deal that says we will never, ever seek to develop nuclear weapons, that's binding on you, and if you ever try to break that,
but we never put that in the original deal, right? We never put in the Obama administration never put that in the original deal, so the Iranians would come back, right? It is in the original deal.
It's just in the prologue to the deal. We're entitled to interpret the deal that makes the prologue binding. We don't have to put an additional word into the deal or get an additional signature. That's already in the deal.
Is it really? Because the Iranians will differ with that, won't they? They'll say, well, wait a minute. Well, then they signed on to a deal that included a line like that. Why would we want to emphasize the line again?
Because they claim that it's only in the prologue to the deal, and there's some vague international law that says that the only binding parts of a deal are the parts that are in the body, not the prologue. But we're entitled to interpret the deal in the context of what they agree to in the prologue. So we don't have to change a single word.
What is the risk to us? I'm sorry to jump in, but what is the risk to us if we back away from this deal?
They won't back away from the deal.
Just hear me out. The world is already saying, wait a minute, you're going to renege on a deal. You're saying we're not reneging on a deal. You're saying there's no black eye to suffer in global opinion toward the U.S.
Well, first of all, we're only enforcing every word of the deal. We're not allowing them to pick and choose among the words in the deal. And what we're doing is essentially saying this deal does not have a sunset provision. It doesn't end in 8 years or 9 years. It isn't a green light to allow you to develop nuclear weapons. The policy of the United States is not to allow you ever to develop nuclear weapons. By the way, President Obama said that. John Kerry said it. Everybody has said it. Now let Congress say it.
All right. So if they don't want to sign on to that, or they don't want to...
They don't have to sign on.
So what are we doing?
They don't have to sign on. It's unilateral. We're telling Iran what our foreign policy is. We're not asking them to agree to it. We're telling them that's our foreign policy. We're giving them advanced deterrent warning that if they seek to develop nuclear weapons, there will be a preemptive military attack. That's what we should have done with Korea. We didn't. It's too late. It's not too late to at least threaten that with Iran. Hopefully that will deter it. But if it doesn't deter it, the only thing worse than a preemptive strike on the Iranian nuclear weapons is for them to develop nuclear weapons.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if the Republicans are having such a troublesome first few months, if the president's off to such a slow start, how is it they're raising money hand over fist? President Bush Sr. visited by his son, the two presidents, commiserating a little bit here, but we're getting word right now from his medical team, that is the President George W. Bush's senior medical team, that he is probably going to be staying through the weekend in Houston at the Methodist Hospital there to get a fully clean bill of health, and then the entire Bush clan makes its way, presumably to Maine, I believe Kennebunkport. But again, all systems look good for the Bushes, and the family is very optimistic. So we'll keep you posted on that. Speaking of health care, a different sort here, a debacle that has many people saying Republicans can't get their act together on how to get a rework going. Then you had all those rowdy town halls. Then you had the tax reform back and forth, where we're even going to get that. Now, despite all of that and a lot of heaping media criticism, get this, the Republican National Committee took in a startling and a record $41.4 million for the first 3 months of the year. Fox Business Network's Conlon McShane on how that was even possible. Conlon.
It really is something, Neil. We just follow the money, and there's more of it to follow than you might think. I mean, that number for the Republican National Committee and what they raised in the first quarter of the year, it's more than they've ever raised in the first quarter after a presidential election. And for the perspective, you just need to look at this. You mentioned $41 million plus for the GOP during President Trump's opening months in office, under $18 million for the Democrats in the early going of the Obama administration. That $41 million number, and a lot of it they say was grassroots, way more than the Democrats raised this time, DNC bringing in less than $24 million. Now, bigger picture, why does it matter? Midterms are coming, of course, and here's part of the statement that was put out by the party chair, Ronna Romney McDaniel, who said Americans across the country are expressing their belief that their best chance for a better life in our country is with continued Republican control of the House, Senate, and the White House under President Trump. And, you know, by the numbers, the Dems need at least 24 seats next year to take the House back. And it's actually subject to change because of some of the special elections that are coming up. But still, around that number, 24. And in the Senate, you have the two-seat majority for the Republicans. So if you look at it from a GOP perspective, Neil, the good news is, first of all, there's only one Republican incumbent in a state won by Hillary Clinton last year that's up for re-election in 2018. And, you know, if these numbers are any indication, it doesn't appear as if money will be any object. Neil?
Amazing. All right, Connell, thank you. Have a good weekend. Sarah Westwood is the Washington Examiner White House correspondent. Sarah, what do you make of this, and what do they make of it?
Well, there are probably several factors that contributed to this fundraising haul, and all of them suggest that the GOP is in a healthy place, at least in terms of resources. One is the unusually high number of special elections that resulted from President Trump's decision to pluck several members of his cabinet from Capitol Hill. There were elections to fill Tom Price's seat, Pompeo's seat, Zinke's seat. Another is the unusually high interest in tax reform, particularly in corporate America. Donors are willing to write checks to the RNC to provide air cover to get tax reform in the end zone. Part of that could also be Steve Wynn's presence on the RNC's Finance Committee. But all of these factors likely converged to give the RNC this robust fundraising haul.
You know, another element might be just the way the administration, Republicans in aggregate, feel the media treats them, whether they're all the fake news media or what have you. This idea that the good the administration is doing or trying to do, you've heard the argument, isn't being addressed as much as all the stumbles, which are natural in any administration, and that is galvanizing a lot of Republican support and bucking up all these dollars. What do you make of it?
Exactly. I mean, Republicans might sense that there is this energized Democratic base that is conspiring to challenge Republican majorities, rather, in the Senate and the House come 2018, and they're preparing for that. One of the major criticisms from the Obama years was the near total neglect of the Democratic Party infrastructure. The party structure atrophied under President Obama, and Democrats are still paying the price for that. So Republicans have taken note, and they're taking steps to ensure that they don't coast on their momentum the way Democrats did after 2008, and they're stocking their war chest, getting ready for the next fight.
How galvanizing is Nancy Pelosi? I know these numbers are after the fact, but she said yesterday that she's very confident Democrats will retake the House. And she's built that on obviously this Kansas race where it was closer than they thought, and this Georgia race that is going into a runoff in June. How is that affecting this money raising?
Well, Republicans know that Democrats are going to pull out all the stops in 2018 to try to retake the House and to try to retake the Senate. The Republican majority is so slim in the Senate that even though the 2018 map is tilted in favor of the GOP, Democrats will still pour every resource that they have into trying to take back the Senate. And Republicans are clearly preparing for that. I mean, Karen Handel in Georgia is running her race all the time, reminding voters that they can't give Nancy Pelosi the speakership. She's a great foil for Republicans who are running in these special elections right now.
All right. Good stuff. Sarah Westwood, Washington Examiner, White House correspondent. Good seeing you again. Safe weekend.
Thank you.
All right. Now we know that even though President Obama has not really said much here about the state of politics, he is talking about the state of politics in France. And he does seem to be hedging his bets toward one particular candidate that's raising eyebrows. Forget about over here. I'm talking about over there after this. The United Nations, John Bolton. John, what did you think of the president intervening here? It reminds me very much about the role he took on Brexit, clearly telling Britons it wasn't in their interest to get out of the Union, and now he's trying it again with France, I guess. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it'll probably have the same effect. I mean, they worded the statement carefully so it wasn't an endorsement. But I don't know about you, but I don't normally have cameras in my office ready to record when I get a random phone call. So Macron clearly thinks this will be to his advantage. I don't think so, but it just shows how up in the air this race is this coming Sunday. You've got four candidates who are grouped relatively close between 20 and 25%. Nobody should think the polls in France are going to be any more accurate than they have been in the past year in Britain or America. And so you could have an outcome on Sunday which will produce two people for the final round in several weeks. It could be any two out of those four at this point.
All right. Now, two of the candidates, Marine Le Pen and the communist candidate, both want out of the European Union. And I'm wondering how, given the terrorist incident yesterday in Paris, how that changes the complexion. And I only mean that to say, do French voters say, look, we keep having these terror incidents, and this has happened under, an establishment-type government, and they keep telling us that they're on top of it, but they're not on top of it. And does that lead to frustration that has these fringe candidates, for want of a better term, doing better than would normally be the case?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. I think the communist-backed candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has just come out of nowhere in the past 2 or 3 weeks.
Big time out of nowhere.
And he's technically, I guess, still in fourth. But as I say, I wouldn't bet money on him coming in fourth. Marine Le Pen is a different story, I think. She's been opposed to the EU, to the euro for some time. She's actually softened her views on that in an effort to get more centrist support. But I tell you, with pollsters in France, as in the United States and Britain, there are wrong answers and right answers. And whatever else one might say about the other three candidates, Marine Le Pen is the wrong answer to give to a pollster. So I think her vote, if anything, is understated in the polls, and that's why this terrorist attack, which no one will say is moving them toward her, but because of her strong views on immigration and terrorism, I think the tragic consequence of the tragedy is that she will benefit.
So understating the populist rage as it benefited Donald Trump, as it benefited Brexit, might appear itself here in France.
Yeah, no, look, this is, as you said before, you've got an enormous amount of discontent in the French electorate, and it's going to burst out. I think anybody who thinks they can tell you in the next 48 hours who the two runoff candidates will be is just throwing darts.
All right. Ambassador, always good seeing you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
All right. Well, the president said he wanted to build a wall. He said eventually he wants the Mexicans to pay for it, but ahead of that, we're going to pay for it. In fact, he's doing it right away, as in next week. Tucker Carlson on that after this. An update here from United Airlines. You remember this passenger dragging incident, and now the United CEO, Oscar Munoz, of course, has been called to testify to Congress. But ahead of that, he has put out an announcement that he will not chair the board in 2018. He will remain as CEO, but not have the dual chairmanship of that company. Whether that mitigates some of the criticism that he will likely get when he appears on Capitol Hill is anyone's guess. He's apologized profusely and repeatedly over that incident. But right now, for the time being, he is planning to give up the chairmanship role, stay with the CEO role. There's no guarantee the board will agree to that. We'll keep you posted. Meanwhile, the White House is raising the stakes right now on this whole border wall. The president is meeting with his top budget director. He's calling for funding of that border wall, which is complicating things for Democrats and, I guess, by extension, Republicans. Tucker Carlson is the host of Tucker Carlson Tonight. You can catch him at 9 p.m. tonight. He'll be on 8 p.m. beginning next week. Amazing individual, so it's good to have him. Tucker, what do you make of this? And the president wants to go through with this wall thing, even if we have to pay for it up front.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by it. I don't think anybody ought to be. He ran on it. It was one of his central promises. The secondary promise was that the Mexican government would pay for it. But the first promise, and I think the most important one, is that it will exist, not just as a metaphor, border security, but as a physical reality. Maybe you can't do it for the entire span of the southern border. There's a river there, and for part of it. But for a lot of it, you can, and it will have an effect. And people voted for him because of that. So I don't think it should be super surprising that he's trying to do it.
I did talk to one Republican, though, on Fox Business Network, which, Tucker, if you don't get, you should demand. One of the things
I watch it.
One of the things they pick, I got to do anything I can do, Tucker, work with me. But one of the things he was saying is, I fully support this, but not now, Mr. President. I mean, we're going to have a tough enough sell of, avoiding a shutdown, a government shutdown. We've already heard from Chuck Schumer that this is a no-go. So we're picking a fight that we really don't want right now when the president's focused on these big tax cuts and everything else. What do you say?
Yeah, so what's the date by which they'll be happy to do this? Let's see, check my calendar. Oh, never. They're not in favor of it because they're not in favor of stopping the flow of cheap labor from the south to the north because their donors aren't in favor of it. I'm not attacking anyone's character, but if they're in favor of it, we would have had it 25 years ago, 50 years ago, when the Kennedy bill first passed, changing our immigration patterns. I mean, that's the truth. But the larger truth is that tens of millions of voters voted with that in mind, and it's a democracy. And so you have to respond to that. And if you don't,